Hi guys, on this episode, I interviewed Eric Klasen, Executive Leader for Quality and Regulatory, with a career spanning many decades across medtech and pharma. He's held roles at Merck, Serono, Novartis, and very well-known Medtronic. We spoke about the problem the regulatory function doesn't know it has, how to build a reputation in your company as a business enabler, and why going for a coffee is better than any business textbook that you're ever going to read. This is one to listen to. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed, the podcast dedicated to talking about careers in the medtech industry. And today I have someone who has over 40 years of experience in the industry, over 25 years of experience in regulatory and quality roles. That is Eric Klasen. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show. So, Eric, you've held roles at some of the industry's most well-known companies, Serono, Novartis. You were the Vice President of Quality and Regulatory over at Medtronic. Now you're doing your own thing in your retirement, but you're still very active, as I hear.
Yes, indeed. I keep on going because I like this, and in fact, it's also that you can focus now on let's say smaller companies, startups, because maybe then something comes, let's say, in play, which I like very much, which is really not just only regulatory, but business development.
And
that is now you can step a little bit out of that sort of role that you needed to have, the regulatory function. And you can also now advise people more broader than probably you did in the past because you stick to your role.
Yeah. And so today we're going to be talking about changing the narrative around the function of regulatory and also how to be perceived and how to really be a partner to the business. And I know that that's something that you're really passionate about. So how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I started in regulatory because I was a consultant at that time. I had left Serono after 8-9 years, and I had been working in the UK for about 8 months as a consultant, actively stepping into a role as director of operations and of quality for a diagnostic company, which was part of the Centocor organization. And in fact, I heard from a colleague that there is a company in Italy, which is sort of a joint venture between an American company from California and Ciba Geigy, and they are in trouble. And I said, okay, let me knock on their door because I like Italy. It's in the middle of Tuscany, so that's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
And I did. And indeed, they had a fraud issue with FDA, but at that time when I talked to them, they didn't say that. When they discovered that I spoke fluently Italian, they suddenly changed their discussion and they say, we don't want you as a consultant. Can you join us in the work? Because we have an issue. And that issue was indeed something they needed to resolve. They had agreed with FDA to hire additional people. And this is how I came in to regulatory. And I said, I never did that. So if you give me a director for regulatory and one for quality control and one for quality assurance, then I will take the role that you want me to do, which is regulatory compliance. And that's how I ended. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and so that was your first role in regulatory.
Yes, and I hired one of the best regulatory people I at that time knew. And in fact, I learned a lot from this person. And as that person was extremely focused on the sort of the office activities and of the technical activities, I started to do more and more of the external part. So meeting with the regulators, that in the end, I started to meet them every week in Italy and Rome because we had batch releases, it was vaccines. So we had batch releases. Then there came mad cow disease. There were all kind of discussions that we needed to communicate and discuss with the regulators. And I started to like it more and more, taking in during the day all the technical stuff. For me, that is not difficult. I can handle all the details technically, but I like the communication part to the outside.
So having sort of been in various different types of regulatory roles over the years, how have you seen the function evolve over time?
That's an interesting question, actually, because in the beginning, when I joined in the vaccine part. It was a very strong R&D company. And from day one, I was at the table of management. And I thought that this was probably the case everywhere, because I was, in fact, in Serono also in such a position. I was participant to all the management meetings of the organizations I work for, diagnostics, biologics, and then biotech. So it was for me like, this is the world. And when I joined Novartis as head of regulatory for the Global Consumer Health Organization, it was when I went to MedTech that I was very surprised that it was very different. That was a very different thing. So I saw a sort of a growing of the function in understanding that it was a very important function on the pharma side. It's very strategic, it's very technical. Yes, there are a lot of things you need to look at before you can finally say, yes, you can do this or you can't do this. On the MedTech side, it was very, very an interesting learning curve, actually. That was a different thing. And that is actually where I'm very interested to focus on now a little bit. How can we change that? How
So,
can we impact that?
so what would you say, really succinctly, what purpose does regulatory serve for a company?
Very simple. Regulatory is the first level access to market. That's it. If you don't have your marketing authorization on the pharma side, or you don't have your approval from FDA for a PMA for on the MedTech side, or you don't have market clearance for a 510K from FDA, or you don't have your CE certificate in Europe, you just don't go to the market. And if you do, that's impossible. Legally, should not be possible. So you need your first level market access. The second level, of course, are things like reimbursement. And then the third one, of course, is what you should have done all at the beginning before you even think of going to the market or even trying to get there, is to understand what is that market actually. And this is where I see that startups today struggle a lot. They have a bright idea and they are already working on it for 2 years. They already collected funding from all kind of nice organizations that give you $1 million or more to work out your idea. But the biggest problem comes at a certain point that they thought to understand the market, and this is also how they presented that to these organizations to get that kind of funding. But then they realized they maybe don't even understand it at all. And that is something that big companies don't make that mistake. They know how to do this.
So if we talk for a moment about startups, what do you see as, like, what do they need to be doing differently then from what you've seen in order to not make these mistakes?
I think from the very beginning, when they start to have a bright idea, is to really is maybe a part of that funding that they get is to use it very early on, to have professionals who know how to do this really understand their real market potential. Because later, when that funding, that initial funding is rather limited, it is maybe $1 million or $2 million, sounds great, but it is peanuts. You burn it within no time. But you have to use that, a piece of that money, to understand that market. Because for the second round of funding, you are coming in front of investors who really want to understand what is your market and what is actually your market potential. What are you going to do in that market? And then you need to have a very strong story with data, with really substantiated information. And that is what my recommendation is today, is that they need to do that much earlier on instead of thinking they have a bright idea. Most scientists, when they invent something, they think that they have, resolved a huge problem in the world. But often it is a disappointment because maybe the world is not even interested in it.
Yeah. And if we talk about like the bigger companies then, right? So we've spoken in the past anecdotally, Eric, about sort of like this PR issue, if you like, between what regulatory people think they do versus what the rest of the company think they do. Can you talk to that point a little bit? What have you seen?
Yeah, that depends from what kind of company we go.
Yeah.
I've been in all the kind of companies. I've been in the typical R&D organizations that have an top management is all real scientists. And there, in my view, there is no misunderstanding of what regulatory is and what it should do, and how to include regulatory in strategic discussions up front, in the middle, and at the end. And then in the end, you get the marketing authorization for your product. On the MedTech side is where I've seen they're still struggling to understand what actually is that role. And a lot of the internal people see the the regulatory people, maybe sometimes even as an internal hurdle.
Mm.
I mean, sometimes I also jokingly say it, and the regulatory function in the medtech, let's say, world can be a bigger barrier than the external regulator. Sometimes the external regulators are much more creative and more, because they have seen a lot. They see a lot of different things from different companies, different strategies, different ways of bringing things to the market. And indeed, on the inside, it can be that people are more limited in their experience, and therefore they become more the ones who say, you can't do this, you cannot do that. Instead of being more open-minded and going out and talk to these regulators wherever you are allowed to do that, and see what can you do. And this is, of course, for different, let's say, US is easier to go to the FDA and ask for advice. I mean, you can have officially advisory meetings. You can get all kind of opinions from FDA. On the medtech side in Europe, that has been for a long time very difficult, becomes easier now. On the pharma side, it has been the same as for FDA. You can ask for advice. It is open. It's an open door. And that's desperately needed on the medtech side also.
So what advice do you have around, like, how do you change the narrative if you're sitting, you know, in you're a brilliant regulatory professional, you're sitting in a department, but somehow the company has this feeling that regulatory are the people that slow stuff down, or they are the barriers? You know, how do you go about changing that narrative?
My experience is that, and I think that this is what would be my advice to all my regulatory colleagues, specifically the ones who are earlier in their career, is you have to be more interested in the business that you're working in. You have to be very interested in, not just saying, oh, it's very interesting, and then focusing only on your job. You must be more involved in it. You must participate as much as you can to business meetings, not necessarily to say a lot, but to listen a lot, to understand what this business is about and learn from your business colleagues. What are the commercial challenges that they normally can have in the market? And to what extent can you, with your experience, contribute to that? So that can also depend on what claims do products make, what indications are we working on, and what do you know about the regulatory opportunities for bringing products to the market? I think that as a regulatory person, the most important thing in a company is to be sure that you are recognized by your colleagues as a person who has interest in the business. Yes, we make healthcare products. Nice. So it's easy to say to yourself, we are making good products. But I'm confident that anybody working in whatever industry, even in the car industry or even in whatever in the industry, are proud of what they do. And I think that regulatory people are also proud because we make healthcare products. So that could be easy. But what they need to do is to be more involved on the business side with their colleagues. Go and have once in a while lunch with your business colleagues one-on-one and ask them, what are your challenges? What are you working on? What is the biggest issue? Because sitting in big meetings where they all discuss their numbers is maybe less, there you can't contribute much. You listen to how they collect numbers and sales and whatever, but that's interesting. That's their job. You're also not inviting them to your nitty-gritty technical detailed meetings, but have once-on-ones, good conversations with your business colleagues. And make it also clear that you are, in fact, also someone who can be very creative when it comes to business ideas and finding solutions. And that's the first step that it needs to be made in order to get a little bit away from this this idea that you are just one of the internal functions that are, yes, unfortunately, we need them, but we don't want to have them at the table.
I think that's really interesting advice, because what you're not saying is, in order to understand more about the business, don't go and do a course on business, but actually just take your business partners out for lunch and ask them some really open questions around what are your priorities and what keeps you awake at night, and have that human interaction. That's
it. These courses are totally a waste of time. You're learning in a very non-dynamic way something about business. Well, you can take a book and read it. I mean, there are tons of books on business and on commercial aspects, but that's not going to bring you anywhere, and it also doesn't connect you to your colleagues. I mean, you can say to the colleague, "Oh, I read this book," and he will say, "Oh, that's interesting," and then he keeps on going. So you need to be sure that you meet the colleagues, and having coffees, lunches, dinners. These are the kind of things where you meet one-on-one and really can tap into the brain. It's the same as some people work in these companies and they ask for a mentor, a business mentor. Honestly, I never had them, and I would even never have asked for them. Why? You don't need that. They're all around you. You just have to contact them. You talk to them. You go out with them. You listen to them. They will also be interested in what you do and how you do. In the end, you will see that will be you will get that they are getting interested in your challenges, in your job. And they will get interested in understanding some of these regulatory rules. It's like the traffic rules. If you don't understand them, you find them all a bunch of nonsense. But of course, they are all there for assuring some kind of effective traffic and effective safety. It's the same with pharmaceuticals or with medtech. Rules are there, but do they always apply to every product under every condition? No, sometimes it's unethical to deny access to a therapy because there is a risk, because giving no therapy at all is probably worse for the patient than getting the opportunity to try something. And so business, if you talk to your business people, there comes a moment they also get interested in your job. But don't go to courses for this because I think it's a total waste of time. Or do an MBA. I don't see any value of people coming out with an MBA and then doing what? Go and talk to your colleagues. They're there for free. Well, maybe you give them a coffee.
Some of the most successful people in business never did any business courses, right? And you just sort of like learn as you go. But the human interaction is important because, you know, not only do you build that connection, but you build that relationship and that internal network. And what I've seen is as people progress through their career and they become more senior, at a certain point when you become the leader of the whole function, actually your stakeholders are people that are not regulatory anymore, right? And you need to be able to communicate with them and have buy-in with them. And you can only do that if you've built relationship over time.
Exactly.
What you one of the good questions that you spoke to just now was like, ask them what their challenges are. Have you seen any themes, any similar challenges over the years? Like typically, what challenges do business people have, and how can regulatory help them?
Well, I think one of them, their challenges is that they always need something new to bring to the market. Again, there's a big difference between pharma and medtech. In medtech, we have no market exclusivity. We have no data exclusivity. So we bring a product to the market and someone can dump a 510K product on top of your neck and then copy you, but copy you in a better way in the US and then you go, you're finished. This is not possible on the pharma side. On the pharma side in the US, you get 5 years of data exclusivity on your original data, and that means that you have 5 years protection. In Europe, it was 10, now it's 8. Okay, the famous rules, they're changing a bit all the time. But in medtech, their challenge is they need to constantly come with something new. And that means they need to be creative. Well, there you can sometimes help them. Because, of course, there is creativity is not only for business people. I mean, we are all having some kind of creative mind. Maybe when we grow up, we are locked into functions and we stop being creative. I probably never had that interest to block myself being creative. And sometimes, therefore, you need in your team to have people who know all the little rules and details so that you don't go too far. You cannot say, okay, we are going to do this, and then there is a real impossibility. This is also how I used my team. But I think that their challenges are often in medtech. They need to consistently come with new things to the market in order to keep their name, their brand, whatever, going. Or they need to base it too much on customer relationship building, which there is a limit to that. Hospitals don't want it anymore, all this cozy relationships between industry, whatever. So they have a lot of challenges. It's not easy. And it is very good to listen to that and to hear that.
So we've spoken about regulatory being considered by some as like a business support function, right? But you seem to see it quite differently, don't you?
For me, I would bluntly say it's a business function.
Okay.
It's just like you have marketing and sales are there. I mean, marketing should support sales, and sales should support marketing to collect the money to pay for it. So I mean, everybody supports everyone. But I think that regulatory and is a typical business function, specifically because there is a very important strategic component in it. In the very beginning, you define what kind of product do you make. When I worked for Novartis Consumer Health, it was very interesting. We started very often with the claim. We had no product at all. We just said, which claim, what is missing in the market in this category, cough, cold, or whatever. What is missing there? Okay, we miss some pediatric products. So the product claim must be, it must be for pediatrics, so it must be very safe. So you started from the claim, and then you start to say which ingredients can comply with that. How do we build the product? How do we define it? How do we do the clinical? How do we get it to the market? So I think that to go away from this idea that regulatory is a business support function is to make sure that we as regulatory people, we communicate. We are a business function, but then also think business. It's not dirty business. It's just business. We are all part of that, and it's very interesting to learn from your business colleagues. And in the end, they will also find it interesting to learn from you when you're looking at your challenges.
What were some of the biggest aha or learnings for you when you started positioning yourself as a business partner rather than a support function?
Yeah, I don't know anymore, because I think I started to do that already very early. And in fact, maybe it went so softly that I never realized what I was doing. It was also not doing it on purpose. What I try now to tell people is do it on purpose.
Yeah.
Because they are already in the middle of a career. As I said, I came into this regulatory in a special way. It was not really intended. I was not looking for regulatory. That was the point. I got it because they had an issue with the FDA and they wanted someone to create something that's called regulatory compliance. But I think that I always saw that when you work with business people on the vaccine side, I went out with business people to South America to sell batches. We had no regulatory approval in these countries, but they desperately needed certain vaccines. And I went to present batch records in 2-3 hour meetings to a bunch of technical people from the ministry or the health agency in those countries. And then I went, of course, with a guy from marketing and sales. And I was doing the talking. And in the end, we had a business deal. And they bought a couple of batches from the company. And these were the kind of experiences where I thought this, you really learn, this is real, the combination of you're doing your function, but actually you're very closely working with the business people to get something done. That was probably the moment I really thought, yeah, this is the way to work. You have to be a part of the business and not doing a function.
You've spoken a couple of times about not being the detailed expert, but making sure you've built a team of people that have a very specific expertise in different areas. How do you deal with being in situations where you don't have all the answers all the time?
I always feel very comfortable with that, because you just say that you don't have the answer directly, but don't worry, I'm going to get it. I think one of the worst things that regulatory people can say is this famous joke that was going around a long time ago in the pharma industry, that regulatory people are the Eskimos of the pharmaceutical organization. Like Eskimos have sort of 20 or 30 ways of saying white, because they're in a white world. Therefore, they have all these different words for different nuances of white, different shades of gray maybe. But the point is that in the joke was that regulatory has 100 ways of saying maybe. I think it is a function known for never giving a yes or a no. It's always a maybe. And it's the same what regulators do, and they give you advice. They immediately put the disclaimer somewhere under the bottom of the report, and they say, you know, this was advice only. It is no legally binding, blah, blah, blah. Even if we read MDCG guidelines, they clearly say this is not legally binding, because the only one who can make a legally binding statement is the European Court of Justice. Well, okay, sorry. really, sorry. I get so upset by this kind of things, simply because we need to be able to say yes or no sometimes. And in fact, in the company, at least, I can understand that the commission and all the others, they have to do it legally correct. So they have to put these disclaimers everywhere. But in the company, you can also say, listen, I don't have the answer right now. I'm going to get it. I come back, give me a week, give me 2 weeks, whatever you need. And then go and talk with all your technical nerds in the group and say, let's go into the detail and look at what can we do? What are the barriers to doing it? What are the risks of doing it? Where are the advantages if we manage to do it? And then see, can we come with an answer? So it is working on the opportunity and then going through the details. If the answer is no, you can't do this, you can go back, but you can at least show that you made a serious effort to see how is it possible. Sometimes you can go back and you say, the way you want it is not possible, but what about this way? And you bring another slightly different version. And maybe then on the business side, they said, wow, well, if that is possible, that's okay too. Because they just gave you an initial idea of what they want. But maybe you can go back and say, I have a variation of what you want. What do you think? This is the way to work with business. Is not always the first thing to say, you can't do this. The first thing you should say, it's maybe something that I really learned in Italy when I worked there for diagnostics industry as my first experience in industry, actually. This was the famous expression that say, don't worry, I will take care of it. It was the non ti preoccupare, ci penso io. That means really don't say no, but you can go back after 1 week and say, look, I tried it, but it doesn't work. And then you explain why. I think that business people are not frustrated when you make an effort and you go back, you explain why this is really sort of a no-go. But in a first intent, in the first discussion, if you still have to go through all the details, in order to shoot from the hip, you say, oh, forget it, you can't do it. Unless you're 100% sure this is impossible. It's completely out of the box. There's no way you can do this. Then you can say that. But this is, I think, very important for regulatory people, is to learn this communication piece with business colleagues.
That's really, really insightful stuff, because I can't tell you, I've been at so many conferences where there's been a question and the typical answer is, it depends, and then everyone laughs. There's no straight answer. And what you're saying is that actually when you're talking to to business people, it's not about it's about giving clarity one way or another, not in that moment even, but just giving some sort of clarity to help navigate the direction that they want to take. And if your answer is no, it's not about saying just straight no, it's about saying these are the options, this is how we can do it. And that's all of a sudden now you're a solution focused person rather than a problem focused person. Instead of talking about all the ways you can't do it, you talk about all the ways that it could be done if we were to change X, Y, and Z. Yeah,
that's exactly the idea. It is really to say, look, these are the conditions that you are looking for. Under those conditions, there is really an issue. But if you change these conditions slightly into this and this, we probably can do it. And that makes you look very different in the eyes of your business partner. They see you not as a support function to whom you ask a question and you get sort of highly the chances that you get a no. And instead, no, you get someone who says, look, give me some more details. What are you looking for? How do you define it in more detail? And then take that with you and then come back. And I think this is much more then you get really the idea. They start to see you more as a business function than as a sort of a regulatory function, which is like an internal police, and they will tell you no. I mean, come on, we don't need an internal police. We have enough of the outside.
So I think that's really, really insightful. And one of the, you mentioned a comment earlier and you said business people, they don't get frustrated if they see, that you've tried something and you're coming back with a no. Do you have any comments around what are the do's and don'ts then? So what are the things, or what are some of the mistakes that you see regulatory sort of perhaps making in front of business that business tend to find quite frustrating?
Well, it is that shooting from the hip with the list of technical details why things can't be done. And I think this is often happening because, and indeed what you said before, if I also see that happening in these meetings, someone asks a question and then the first answer is, well, yeah, it depends. It depends on what. I think this is that is the wrong answer. The answer is that you say, we need to go through the details, because the way that we take the details, maybe the outcome and the opportunity to do something is different. So let me have a look at what are the critical details that needed to be in a certain position. Is it on or off? If that is on, it's a no-go. If you can switch that requirement off, we can move on and we can sort of get something done. You have to drop something to get the total product coming out. Some of the requirements for the product. Because if you look for too many details that you want to have in your way, maybe it doesn't work. So it is indeed communicating with business people in a more positive note and in a more positive way than is the tendency today still.
Mm.
And
So
I think this indeed, or this it depends. I think we should just take it out of our vocabulary. The maybe and the it depends. The answer should be yes, but let's look at some details to make that work.
Perhaps people are afraid of like giving a concrete answer at that point in time in case they might be wrong, though.
Well, that's the risk of any job. If the CEO asks his sales team, I want these and these numbers in your next quarter, you know, of course, they all are looking, how the heck am I going to do that? I've seen them, all of them. And some of them indeed come up with all the reasons why this is not possible. And I can tell you, those people don't sit very long at that table either. Mm. And they are business people. And suddenly you hear that Mr. So-and-so is no longer there.
Yeah.
Because they say too often why you cannot do this. And then it's the same. It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So it's not that they treat us different from their own, let's say, kind. If you're in the business, you should see when you get these kind of very challenging targets from your management boss, whoever makes those targets. I've seen many of these discussions where then the people say, okay, let's go for it. Let's see how we fix that.
Yeah.
But it's the ones who are immediately shooting from the hip to tell the big boss why all this is impossible. They don't survive very long.
Something that I learned from actually someone in my team is this mindset of like, everything's possible. So the default answer is everything's possible. The question is how, right? And the how is where you need to be flexible. The how is where you need to be creative. The how is where maybe you need to change a whole lot of stuff. Maybe you need to like hire a massive team. Maybe the how is in the end not possible. But actually, if you change your mindset to like, well, anything is possible. So how do we get to that result? What are the different things we're going to need to change? And then you can take a business decision of, okay, you know, you can do that, but maybe you're going to need to invest a whole load of money. And actually, no, we're not prepared to invest that, right? But it allows you to it actually changes your mindset. Instead of focusing on the reasons why you can't, focus on actually, well, if everything is possible, how can you get to that possible outcome? So that was something that I learned from my team.
No, I think that's a very good way of looking at it, because it's indeed the why and the what are often clear and even desirable from all angles. Even whether you're a regulator working in healthcare, you might say, yes, if you can bring something to the market that can do that, that would be great for patients. We know it. But how? How do you get that product to the market? Under what conditions? And what are you going to do for it? And then in the end, you have to look at, okay, so what does that cost? What's the investment that you need to make in order to get that all on the table? And if that is too much, then you need to go back again and negotiate with the regulators. Can we do it in a slightly different way? And this is, again, also regulators are part of the discussion. It's not that they are sitting there statically. They are very active people. On the pharma side, I find them always, in my experience, very, very active partners. And on the medtech side also, I have only had very good experiences with medtech regulators on the competent authority side. when you discuss post-market issues, mostly with them, because they are not involved directly on the pre-market side, that's the notified bodies. But there you have very active, involved, interested, and understanding, participating to discussions. I've never seen that they bluntly say no and that's it. They are very open to negotiate and to discuss and to look at different points that you bring to the table. So I think also there is not a definite no, there is a discussion, there is a looking at the how. The what maybe is clear for both parties, but the how. I remember discussions about you need to take a recall, you need to do this, you need to take a product off the market. That we can agree on, but how we do this is maybe the discussion. And I think in my experience, I had really very, very good positive experiences with those kind of debates and discussions. And I think it's all a matter of being open and transparent with each other. And that's the same with business people, but stop internally saying, no, you can't do this. I think it is much more to say, I understand what you want, that I understand why you want it and what you want. Now let's see how we get there. I think that's a nice approach that you just suggested, and we should introduce that. That's another strategy for regulatory people to look at opportunities.
So obviously you've had a long career and it's still going, and you've worked across obviously these different functions and different types of businesses and startups, big companies. Who stands out for you? Because we've all had, I mean, you said that you don't actively look for mentors, but everybody gets helped in some way along their career, right? Everybody has someone that's given them their first chance or helped them navigate something big. Who has been the person that for you has played a major role in your career story?
I think almost all my bosses. Honestly, I was lucky. I had very good ones already very early on at the university when I still worked there as a scientist. The professor I worked for was an amazing guy. He was extremely motivational, always supporting. He found me very creative, and every time I had a crazy idea, he said, "Sounds great, try it." And this kind of things were very motivational. I think that in my career, I had many people that to whom I reported directly, who gave me the freedom to act. And I think that's the most important. I cannot remember one boss who micromanaged me. I think maybe even my parents didn't manage. So I think my bosses also gave up on trying to micromanage me. This is not possible. But I never had anyone who was interested to do it. Up to the last boss that I have had with Medtronic was an amazing guy. I can mention his name, but I don't want to know if he wants to be mentioned on this sort of discussion. But it's an amazing person. And indeed, one of these people are the people that you look at and you look how they operate, how they work, and they are models for you. You don't copy them, but you can learn from them. And you don't need them as a mentor, because a 5-minute coffee break with such a person is almost like a 3-hour mentorship. You can learn such an amount from these people. So for me, these were all people that have supported me in my career, mostly by giving me the freedom. And when I knocked on their door for some advice, I always got the 5 minutes that I needed. I think they were all very motivational and stimulating my career.
So what actionable takeaways? So for all the people that are listening to this episode today, what can they go away and change immediately to help them change the narrative?
First of all, I think that if they are not, because this is what I still see happening in some of the medtech companies, where the regulatory and the top function, either the VP or a senior director, whatever they have as their highest function, is not at the management table. It's not part of the management team. They need to discuss this with their direct manager, who is often then maybe the CEO or the one who's heading the organization, and to be part of that. To be part of the management team, unless they feel that they are reporting to someone who's for the head of operations and who really represents them in that management team. Okay, but if they are not directly represented by someone, they need to do it themselves. I think that's the first thing they need to do. and they need to change it, is to reach out to your business people and have more personal contact with them, on let's say on the work, and on understanding what kind of challenges they have, and how can you together come up with creative ideas to move again the company and add value to what you're doing, either with respect to new products or new processes, and also trying together maybe sometimes to take away the complexity. Companies have become today sometimes so complex that we get bogged down by all kind of internal procedures. Sometimes the internal workload is taking so much time that we have hardly time to spend on the outside, which we should do much more. I think this is also where you can talk with your business partners on how can we reduce all these formalities and all these internal procedures and processes that we have created. Sometimes you do it to pass an FDA inspection, or you pass an ISO 13485 inspection. You create tons of procedures. In the end, sorry, do you need it? You can try to simplify your life, and therefore you have more space and time to communicate, collaborate.
So I've got one final question, Eric, which is like the really big one that I like to ask everybody. And that's, what is the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
Oh my God. I wish I was a writer, then I could say, read my book. I didn't write a book yet. I think the legacy, yes, exactly. The legacy I would like to leave is that people really learn how to communicate with each other. And whatever you do in a company, in the end of the day, you do it all together. No one does it on its own. It's one big collaborative approach. And the legacy I would like to leave is that you need to do two things. If you are a leader in this function, then I think you need to work with the business people, because that will also benefit all the people in your team. And you need to take care of the career path, not only of your own, but you need to take care of the career path of the people in your team. And you need also to train them and educate them to go out and communicate with their colleagues on the business side, and how to do this. Because this is, they need to see it, maybe you doing it. That is maybe the best example. And then you need to motivate them also to do it. Their career path is your responsibility also. And not just once in a year to do a performance appraisal. This is totally irrelevant. It's the day-to-day coaching of your team.
Well, Eric, this has been a really, really interesting and eye-opening episode. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Elena. Thanks.
And to those of you who are listening, don't forget to give this a like, a thumbs up, write a comment, and follow Eric on LinkedIn. And I will see you all in a couple of weeks for another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed. See you soon. Bye.